English translation 541st Contact Saturday, the 2nd of June 2012, 14:16 hours.
Hello, there you are, dear friend. Today the correction work was also smooth and quickly completed.
It was pleasing.
If you allow me, I have a few questions first.
There is nothing wrong with that.
Well, the first question refers to a strange incident that has been reported to me but which I do not want to bring up openly, because otherwise certain people might say that this is crazy and that the guy belongs in a madhouse. Well, the thing is...
The thing seems to be very strange, but it is probably explainable in the following way. From our point of view, there was nothing of the sort of thing that was done, so that only the explanation given remains.
Then an important change had to occur in the world of thoughts and feelings, so that the whole thing could happen as a late ignition, so to speak.
That is the explanation for it, yes. Without this change, the whole thing could not have happened.
Then another question. When I looked in the contact reports, I noticed that we briefly discussed something concerning nanotechnology in various official contact conversations. We also talked about the small control disk. It was at the 300th contact conversation on the 24th of April 2001, where you said that it had a quantity of 74 exabytes. You also officially said that nanoparticles are extremely harmful to the human body. But you did not say anything else about the fact that in addition to cancer, lung diseases, etc., this can also be caused by breathing in such particles. I would be interested to know how the nanoparticles actually work in the human body, where they mainly occur, and what influence they have on the organs.
About the occurrence of the nanoparticles, it is to be said that they are present practically everywhere, as they are produced by Earth humans also with petrol and oil combustion engines and by the smoke of the fire, but also by the vice of smoking and the evaporation and atomization of chemicals and in all kinds of other substances. Nanoparticles are also produced by powdery substances, fireworks, the abrasion of rubber, and many other soft and hard materials. Even the finest dust particles in the atmosphere are nanoparticles, as are the finest ejections and smoke from explosives of all forms, including atomic and hydrogen bombs and the ammunition of all firearms and light and heavy guns of all kinds. All rockets, also the so-called space rockets and military-guided weapons, produce enormous masses of nanoparticles through their explosive ejection. A great many products which are used by Earth humans on a daily basis contain large quantities of nanos, not only microfiber fabrics and all kinds of important and unimportant consumer goods, but also certain foodstuffs, without consumers being aware of them, because there is no obligation to label them, so that the human beings cannot protect themselves against them and they cannot avoid these products. It must also be said that practically every liquid, soft and hard substance respectively, every material can be broken up, crushed, atomized, evaporated, and refined to such an extent that particles the size of nanos are created, which can then lead to immeasurable dangers of various forms, such as explosions. As you yourself know with regard to metal nanos, grain flour nanos, and sawdust nanos, etc., respectively metal dust nanos, grain flour dust, and sawdust dust, which are highly explosive. If, however, nanoparticles get into the pores of the human beings, into food and thus into the body, but especially through inhalation into the respiratory organs and thus also into the lungs, they penetrate the barrier to the blood and enrich the organs, from which the heart and brain are not spared, which, taken as a whole, ultimately causes many kinds of suffering, ranging from all kinds of susceptibilities, inflammations and allergies to serious and very serious suffering of all kinds, including cancer, and to the failure of various organs, which ultimately leads to death.
Very unpleasant. Nano means dwarf in Latin, but how big is a nanoparticle?
Each tiny particle of nano is smaller than 100 nanometers, whereby a nanometer in size has a factor of 109.
So what corresponds to a billionth of a meter? and is several hundred times thinner than a fine human hair.
Correct.
So now I also understand your explanation of 2001, when you said that the new control disk of 4 mm surface area and 1 mm thickness, which you stationed at several hundred kilometers altitude, has a capacity of 74 exabytes, that is 74 quintillion bytes. There is a generator or something similar built into this tiny control device, as well as an observation system, a transmitter, and receiver. There is also an image recording device installed, with which something can be captured on Earth extremely clearly and sharply to the centimeter, as you once said privately.
That is also correct.
Then I have a question regarding the Buddha statues, etc., which were destroyed years ago by the extremely fanatical Taliban. Is it possible that when the foreign military forces withdraw from Afghanistan, the Islamist fanatical Taliban will destroy more of these things, which are declared as world cultural heritage? In my opinion, apart from the Taliban, this can also happen elsewhere with other extremely fanatical Islamists, because fanaticism and false fundamentalism mania knows no bounds, which is why the Islamist fanatics, who are not true Muslims but rather well-versed sectarian delusions of faith fanatics, also want to establish so-called God states everywhere and introduce Sharia, which they want to implement in their delusions of faith through torture and murder.
What has happened in Afghanistan with regard to the destruction of world cultural heritage as a result of the Islamic Taliban's extreme fundamentalist religious delusion may happen again at any time. But we have no foresight for the future. In principle, we no longer make general forecasts, as I explained to you some time ago. What we are still doing in this respect are only observations based on old forecasts, which, according to our own information, we continue to follow up. This is also the case with regard to fundamentalist Islamic extremism in the world in general, and we are currently observing, for example, on the basis of factors based on earlier forecasts, what is happening in the state of Mali in Africa, where the same Islamic fundamentalist extremist delusion of destruction of world cultural heritage is developing as it was in Afghanistan by the Taliban.
And when will this be put into practice?
It will happen in less than 4 weeks.
So this is as good as a prediction.
This is not fair, my friend, because I did not want to give such a prediction.
Let it go, dear friend. It might have been really mean of me, but if you do not dare, you won't win. Besides, you did not break your word because it wasn't in your mind to make a prediction. Actually, I confused you and elicited an answer from you, which you simply answered quickly and thoughtlessly.
You can see it that way, yes, but I am embarrassed.
You do not have to be, because it was not done intentionally in the sense that you wanted to break your word. So let it go. Look, here I have written a new article entitled The Power of Correct Words and Behavior, which I will also give you to read. It has a little over 6 A4 pages, so you should probably read it later. Bernadette thinks that I should put the article in a bulletin and also make it into an A6 brochure. I want to give it to you to read, because she and I think that it also deserves a place in today's Contact Conversation report.
I can look through it superficially now, which will not take too much time, if it is convenient for you.
There is nothing wrong with that. Here, please, you can take the printout with you.
Thanks.
Ta reads.
The might of correct words and correct behavior.
There is a creational natural law and a recommendation that correct words and correct behavior are beneficial to all the human beings who use them and guarantee a life lived in decency, honor and dignity for everyone, and give them friendships. Honesty and modesty are of paramount importance, as well as a non-seeking for influence and power in a negative sense, which is characteristic of so many human beings. Many have or want them and are so stubborn in them that they do not want to turn away from them and cannot free themselves from them, because everything is too deeply rooted in them. From the bottom up, however, The natural laws and recommendations of creation teach that the human beings should rule over themselves with all the power they need, but should not exercise this power in a negative way over their fellow human beings. Through every wrong form of education of those who have the power of education and through wrong self-education, the human beings learn the hunger for domination of their fellow human beings and for power over them. And this is quite contrary to what the creational natural laws and recommendations recommend, that absolute equality should prevail among all life forms. Although all herds of living beings, as well as all groups, families, organizations and states, etc., need authoritative leadership, the laws and recommendations of creation and nature dictate that this leadership should be equal to those who are led and should not be dominating and exercising power in a negative way. The same laws and recommendations of creational natural origin teach that the human beings should not fight for power of domination over their fellow human beings, but should place themselves on an equal footing with all of them in equality. But the human beings of the earth pay no attention to this. For through false education, through misunderstanding and ignorance of the creational natural laws, he has become selfish, egoistic, and power-hungry. As a result, the greater part of humanity fights for his power, defending it with every unfair means imaginable, contesting it from others and taking it away. And this happens from the most simple human beings up to the highest positions of governments, religions, sects in the economy, etc. And the fact is that there is a tremendous struggle for power and for the domination of fellow human beings, who as foot soldiers and subordinates have nothing truly human to expect from those who are greedy for power and domination. If we take a closer look at the domination and exercise of power in relation to our fellow human beings, it can be seen that neither honesty and decency, nor humanity and honor, nor dignity can be applied when it comes to gaining power. Especially in this stage of attaining power, all negative, evil, and unfair means are used ruthlessly. And if the goal of gaining power is actually achieved, there are always enough stupid followers who cheer the victors, even when they are bullied to the point of blood by them. The arena of power struggles takes many different forms, and even many people enter it in order to gradually gain dominance over their fellow human beings. But in fact, there is also another way, namely to become truly human beings, to dominate oneself alone and only exercise power over oneself, while one's own person is placed on an equal footing with the fellow human beings in honor and dignity, in equality and equal rights. But very few people can do this because they do not know how this works and how correct behavior must be worked out. Only a few really are where the capacity for correct action and doing permeates. The majority, however, depends on the negative rules of power. And consequently, the laws of equality and equivalence cannot be applied, nor can the modesty, honor, honesty, and dignity which alone can really strengthen one's own inner and outer position. Once the mastery and power over one's own person has been won, even if it has to be worked out very laboriously, then it is recognized that it is not necessary to break the rule and power of others. Because only one's own strength, mastery, and power over one's own personality, one's own character, and one's own positive balanced behavior are of real value. Those who have influence and power over themselves are also the only ones who decide how they respect their fellow human beings in honesty, honor, justice, love, and dignity, how they treat them or how they lead them humanely without exercising negative power when they are elevated to a position of leadership. And the one who leads his fellow human beings with an open and honest smile, who treats and respects them decently and treats them respectfully in equality and equity, is truly the human beings who do not manipulate others. Manipulation of the human beings is only peculiar to those who have lost their power, who constantly live according to rules of dominance and consider themselves to be much more than they really are. But the human being is far from domination. He is concerned to be equal to his fellow human beings in every respect. And therefore, he also behaves in every conceivable necessary relationship in such a way that he is considered by them to be equal and of equal value. This means that the human being's honest and correct behavior and words are always formed in such a way that trust and togetherness are the result. Using correct words and correct behavior also means that, outside of any ambition of power struggle, everything is perceived and understood correctly, so that no misunderstandings arise and no wrong decisions are made. It is also essential to ensure that the human beings to whom words are addressed and to whom behaviors are presented receive and understand everything correctly and also recognize the honesty and dignity of the whole. If this happens, then it is imperative for the righteous, except for troublemakers, know-it-alls, malicious critics, liars and slanderers, etc., that they respond to the honesty of words and behavior and react positively. It should be noted, however, that those who want to dominate their fellow human beings also use the same methods, but in absolutely unfair forms that are harmful to their fellow human beings, which enables them to dominate, enslave, and exploit their followers. A true human being, for whom honesty, honor and dignity and all virtues as well as freedom, peace and harmony are great values in life, takes care that he is always his own lord and master over himself, that he decides for himself in all things due to him, and that he is consciously responsible for everything and anything, and for his own existence and life. This also means that he observes the rule to draw attention to himself, his rights, his knowledge, his abilities, his possibilities, and his attitude, and to stand up for this in his family, friends and acquaintances, and also in public if this should be absolutely necessary. However, no role of justification should or must be played in this, nor must complete isolation and retreat, because, as required by necessity, there must always be a question and answer session for which various forms are possible. However, malicious, lying, criticizing, know-it-all, and slanderous attacks should not and need not be dealt with unless they are made absolutely necessary by specific situations. Such attacks are invariably attributed to stupid and inexperienced human beings and usually kill themselves. However, it is important for the human beings to be perceived with their honor, honesty, and dignity, as well as with their knowledge, their actions, and their behavior, so that they do not disappear into oblivion. But if he does not pay attention to being perceived, then he will become a loser, because only by drawing attention to himself and by acquiring attributes of recognition and respect will the human beings also be granted the value he deserves. For him, however, this does not only refer to his own family, his circle of friends and acquaintances, but also to all his fellow human beings with whom he comes into direct or indirect contact. In fact, it is true that everything that is not seen by his fellow human beings in one or more of them is simply ignored, counts for nothing, and has no value. If the human beings in their behavior and their statements, explanations, actions, deeds, and words are perceived at all, then it does not matter at all whether the whole thing is positive or negative, good or bad. What falls into the observation and perception of human beings or causes headlines in the media. Because what is important is that the observations and perceptions are made at all, and that headlines attract attention. The fact that friends and enemies emerge from this is just as inevitable as the fact that if friends are to be won, enemies will also inevitably appear. But it is fundamental that the human beings have to do something, on the one hand to stand up to themselves, and on the other hand to attract the attention of their fellow human beings and to be noticed at all. So the human beings must not hide their own light under a bushel, because otherwise they will not be noticed and will be consistently and repeatedly disadvantaged and considered stupid and clueless. But he must also not let his own light shine brightly over him, Otherwise, he himself will only be seen, adored and lifted above himself in a circle of rays, which inevitably leads to arrogance, megalomania, selfishness, self-importance, overestimation of himself and arrogance, etc. Therefore, your own light must always shine, but only in the correct light. And for this to be and remain so, or will be so, the right words and the right behavior must always be chosen and cultivated, because the correct words and behavior make the music that human beings like to hear and perceive. Truthfully, a single word or a single short sentence, as well as behavior, determines how the human beings are perceived. The words and behavior of each individual human being are judged by his fellow human beings, and consequently a judgment is made through them, through which the human being is neither humiliated, hated, despised, disregarded, or respected, loved, honored, and honored. When dealing with the human beings, nothing is as effective and important for the individual as his language, his words, and his behavior, because this is what is looked after as nothing else, and from this is judged and judged. The language, words, and behavior of the human beings direct their thoughts and feelings in very specific directions, so that many friends can be made or many enemies made, depending on how everything affects different human beings. Language, in just a few words and behavior, can make friends enemies and enemies friends. The correct language, the use of correct words and the correct behavior of the human beings will in any case lead to friends being gathered around them and to them respecting, honoring, appreciating, and loving them. It is not to be avoided, however, that hostile people also appear. Know-it-alls, cheats, critics, and all sorts of other opponents who, out of envy and other base motives, are averse to recognizing and accepting the great values that others have in relation to them. But it is important for the honest and good human beings not to care about these adversaries and not to pay attention to their bad actions, but simply to let them run wild in their madness, for any justification towards them would only strengthen their feeble-minded actions, which finds its reason in their boundless stupidity. It is all the more important for the human beings to know how to use their language and their words and how to behave, how and when they create great benefit for themselves or how and when they harm themselves. Using certain words is of enormous importance, because the correct choice of words creates many friendships and attracts many like-minded people. And it is of the utmost importance that when speaking, one does not constantly speak of one's personality and of the I. If people are already talking about their own person, it must be in a simple language, not one that is related to me, and in such a way that everything is presented in a simple way of speaking and in simple, modest words, without making a fuss and presenting oneself as a hero. Telling something modestly, not cutting up, but simply telling something interesting in a simple way with equally simple words always creates attentive listeners and friends. While the human beings who, on the contrary, only emphasize, cut up, and exaggerate themselves only reap boredom, inattention, and enmity. If the human beings want to win friends, be respected, honored, and appreciated, then they must be educated in honesty and certainty in their attitudes, thoughts, and feelings in such a way that they are a part of the whole of humanity, even when they lead their own lives as individuals. In this way, he can speak of himself, if something is related to him alone, but if there are any fellow human beings involved in this life, or in actions and deeds, etc., connected with it, then it is in any case disrespectful, dishonest, undignified, mean, and selfish, as well as contemptuous, if any things are spoken of in an ego form when other human beings are involved. If only the I is spoken of when others are involved in something, such as property, possessions, work, an action or deed, etc., then this is not only unfair and selfish, but also a lie, a deception, and a slander. So if there is any common ground, it is never the I, but only the we, because What is done together is not the business of any one person, but of all of us together who are involved. This also applies when something is being sought together, when something has to be done and done together, when something has to be determined and carried out. And when the we is spoken of in this way, then all those involved in the whole feel addressed, and it may even be said that the honest and dignified we also addresses enemies, which can break some enmities. This is based on the fact that the human beings, when addressed by the we, consciously feel part of the human community. This creates a brain chemical reaction that produces the hormone dopamine, which pervades thoughts and feelings with impulses of happiness. If the language, the words and also the behavior of a human being is directed towards the corresponding community of human beings through the honest and dignified use of the word value we, then positive thought and feeling impulses arise for him. And this is also the case when the human beings, through what they speak, perhaps reduce their prestige somewhat. The use of the word we is of paramount importance in general and in specific cases in dealing with the human beings, as is the request, which has a very special meaning, as well as should or should instead of must. If something should or should be done and the phrase this or that should still be done is used in this context, then this corresponds both to a request and to the fact of something that cannot be postponed, which is incurred and is to be done, but which is not must be done by order, but is should done voluntarily. If must is used in the language in the sense mentioned above, then the whole thing is in any case always tantamount to an order and compulsion, which is, however, omitted by the shall, which expresses the voluntariness of doing something. And if, in relation to something, the whole is connected with please, just when something is asked for or should serves as a direct request to do something, then the human being's free will is addressed so that they themselves have to decide whether they want to do something or not. And if something is released in this way, then the other person becomes more compliant and on his own initiative follows the indirect request to do what is should or should be done. With this specifically determined voluntary insertion into a job or into something is also connected a compatibility, peaceableness, an appropriate decency as well as commitment, harmony and a connecting, friendly and joyful behavior, etc. If, on the contrary, there is a must, then this is always compulsively conditioned, and then automatically listlessness, joylessness, resistance and all other negative emotions appear, whereby the work to be done may suffer qualitatively from this and be carried out with poor performance, because the whole thing can only be laboriously mastered as a result of the must compulsion. This should be viewed and judged from a purely psychological point of view. If something has to be talked about, told, or explained, there is a golden rule that must be observed. In this case, too, the person speaking, telling, or explaining is free to decide whether or not to follow the rule by should, respectively should. And this rule says and teaches that only as much as necessary should be said, no matter whether it is about sensitive or tough things and topics. If, for example, the subject matter to be dealt with is rich in learning, short explanations encourage the listeners to think about everything themselves and to try to understand the whole thing, which in turn leads to the fact that sooner or later correspondingly pertinent questions are asked which require further explanation. Of course, this can take time from a few minutes to several years, during which time everything is considered and understood. This is the inevitable development of oral learning, as it begins at an early age in children, when the educators have to explain all sorts of things to them, and they have to answer questions. Depending on the individual case, it is also the case that the person speaking and explaining also removes the basis for unnecessary speculation if certain sensitive things and topics are only addressed or explained as far as necessary. By talking only as much as necessary and avoiding unnecessary discussions, The person speaking and explaining or teaching also does not have to bear the responsibility if misunderstandings arise among the listeners due to misinterpretations. Therefore, the rule should always apply that when speaking, explaining, telling, and teaching, everything should always be presented concisely, dryly, and unadorned, but honestly, clearly, distinctly, and accurately. On the one hand, many values can be expressed quickly and comprehensively, and on the other hand, this way of speaking encourages the interest of the listeners, which makes the person speaking become a rooster in the basket, so to speak, which should not lead to arrogance, selfishness, self-importance, and delusions of grandeur. There is also a rule that says that one should remain calm and simple on the ground of modesty and restraint. Dignified human beings say little, only in accordance with reality and its truth, and they speak only when necessary, which is why they also have a very impressive, trusting, and interpersonal value for their fellow human beings. At the same time, they are also very clearly aware that if they speak little, and only according to reality and its truth, they cannot say anything banal, stupid, or wrong. If something is said, spoken, explained, told, or taught, then this always requires a certain point in time, therefore a precise timing respectively and exact. Precise coordination of the process's timing has to be observed. For example, the exact and correct point in time when and how something should be said, done, or explained. If this is not observed, then this is a serious mistake that can bring about many disadvantages, many hardships, and many evils, whereby the word alone should be remembered that whoever is in the wrong place at the wrong time, or whoever says the wrong thing at the wrong time, suffers great harm. If the coordination of the processes and the correct timing is also not observed when talking, explaining, telling, teaching, and lecturing, then the whole thing will go wrong. This, however, must be avoided and requires that everything be considered in the correct way. But if this is ignored, then this is a serious mistake that can cause immense damage. Even the words and sentences that are used must be constantly checked. Otherwise, there is a danger of getting caught in the nettles or making oneself impossible. Even the best words and sentences that are put together have to be constantly checked for their correctness and revised if necessary. This is also necessary when time is ticking away, when there is a delay, or when things go faster than expected. If a wrong word or a wrong sentence is said at the wrong time, something is explained, told, instructed, or taught at the wrong time, this can lead to a personal or community disaster. This is also the case when the human beings want to make their voice heard or claim their rights in any matter. It is also true that quick and rational thought, deliberation, and quick action are required, because delays caused by slow thinking and deliberation can cause enormous damage. This is a point which power-hungry people hate deeply because, as a rule, they want everything to be done quickly in their favor. So they bring time into play as a decisive factor, which is usually lacking in their fellow human beings because they are more calm and leisurely in their thoughts and feelings. So they have a lot of time to make up their minds. But this time is running out for those who are obsessed with power. So time plays a decisive role for them, and they are constantly pressed to achieve their power goals. But this is inevitably connected with the fact that they use rhetorical manipulation to influence the views and opinions of the listeners or subordinates in a violent and coercive way, and to break the will which is inherent in them and only weakly present. Thus, the listeners or subordinates are not able to prevent the plans of those in power or to throw them off when they come into being. So it is true for the normal, simple human beings who do not possess the lust for power themselves, that they always stick to reality and its truth, which also means that they make use of their own rationality, use their intellect and reason, and through them recognize the lust for power of the powerful and defend themselves against them instead of joining in the howling of power. This may be deeply painful for the human being who are in bondage to the lust for power, who regard them as idols, who lie at their feet and crawl before them in the dust, but who humiliate themselves to a roaring humility. In dealing with the human beings, it is of special importance that they are addressed by their correct name, because to hear one's own name from the mouth of a fellow human being, or to read it in a letter, etc., is music to his ears and creates impulses of happiness in him. This really has nothing to do with arrogance, megalomania, selfishness, and the like, but with the fact that he wants to be appreciated as the human beings in decency, honesty, and respect, which is also his right. The titles of doctor or director or any other title are of no significance whatsoever to a healthy, normal, and reasonable thinking person, for they are as fundamental as smoke and mirrors and say nothing about the character, personality, and state of human beings. And as a rule, only the selfish, self-important, and arrogant, etc., are keen on such titles in terms of what they refer to. In all this, the sound and correct emphasis of words and sentences also plays a very important role, as does their positive or negative form. In this respect, especially in the 1980s, a wickedly wrong form of stressing words and sentences appeared around the world, resulting in a disharmony of words, sentences, and language that has lasted until the present day of the 21st century. And just as this extremely negative and bad form of word and sentence stress has spread, so has everything negative and bad spread worldwide. Since this linguistic disharmony, the false emphasis of words and sentences, came into being, a great deal of what the human beings of the earth are doing is going up and down in the world. A great deal is going wrong and is moving in destructive ways. The completely disharmonious forms of organized wheeling and dealing, which since the 1980s has been called music and song, as well as the false emphasis on words and sentences, have had an increasingly negative effect on everything up to the present day. Sectarian religious terrorism has spread throughout the world. Massacres of the human beings through riots and more acts of war have increased enormously, as well as a worldwide mismanagement of banks, states, companies, corporations, and families, etc. In all of these are undeniable effects of what has been a very bad, negative trend of misuse of words and sentences from the 1980s. Even if the self-proclaimed seven-eyed think it is ridiculous and refuse to believe it. The whole thing, however, causes an enormous amount of physical and psychological pain to the human beings, which cannot be fully processed by the pain center in the brain, and as a result they become more and more freaked out, lapse into mental crises, give free rein to enormous aggressions, and become antisocial and unable to live, etc. If we take a closer look at the human beings as language, the words and the sentences that emerge from them, we can see that they contain much more than just their pure content. The language, the words, and the sentences with which the human beings communicate with each other and with each other are an emotional power from which nobody can escape. Thus, individual words alone determine whether someone is taken seriously or not, and if, for example, and, or, but, nevertheless, then, well, so, not and, I, or nevertheless, etc., are used constantly or frequently when speaking, then the human beings who speak offer a large surface for attack, which reveals their goals and causes mistrust and antipathy. If one's own strength and integrity, as well as one's modesty, honesty, honor, and dignity, are shown to advantage in a conversation, in a speech, or in teachings and explanations, then these must also be expressed openly through language. This requires, however, that in relation to one's own values, knowledge, abilities, and possibilities, a healthy dominance based on modesty must be shown and played along, which does not result in any manipulation of the listeners, but on the contrary, in a deliberately own interest, whereby they also recognize, acknowledge, and respect the values of the speaker. This is not about a power struggle between the person speaking and the listeners, nor is it about wanting to gain influence, but solely about the fact that everything is clearly and unambiguously appreciated with interest by the listeners, so that the whole thing can be understood and comprehended, which includes questioning the matter as well as the necessary answers and explanations. Only human beings who are immodest and strive for power underpin everything they say and do with such perceptible dominance that the listeners are manipulated and believe that it is their own opinion if they take the same line as the power theorists. In every situation, power-obsessed people fight for their dominance in an absolutely immodest and negative way. Manipulation, violence, and coercion, but also acting, lying, and cheating, as well as slander, revenge, and retribution, are indispensable means for them. And when they strive to increase their influence and power, they do not even consciously perceive what evil and degenerate and inhumane things they are actually doing. When they strive for their supremacy and command, or defend their position of power by manipulation, violence, and coercion and all unfair means. The rule of the whole, however, is that very often the fight is not open, but only subliminally to fool the fellow human beings through lies and deception, and not to let them see the true face and the true intentions hidden behind the power-hungry machinations. If, however, these lousy emotions and machinations of the power-hungry are recognized by their fellow human beings, then situations arise which undermine and make it impossible for those striving for power to achieve their goals. Thus, the power behavior and the retention of power of the power-obsessed can only function as long as the fellow human beings do not control their own intellect, their own reason, and their own power of decision, but leave everything to the power-hungry. As long as those possessed of power can control their emotions through their rational thinking and hide them from their fellow men so that they do not recognize the true nature of those who hold power, they can exercise their power and keep the people under their thumb. And this has also affected the whole earthly humanity since time immemorial, which has been proven true during thousands of years of earthly human history. The history of terrestrial humanity is a history of wars, massacres, uprisings, revolutions and murders, criminality, crimes, and the degenerated religious sectarian madness which has cost millions of human lives. And it is a history of revenge and retribution, of greed and avarice, as well as injustice, torture, the death penalty, depravity, and all evil degenerations. There have always been tremendously evil and wicked thoughts, feelings and emotions involved in all of this. But in principle, every human being should control them at their best and not offer them as weapons to the power-hungry and enemies. If the human beings want to appear valuable in life in the best possible way in relation to their fellow human beings, then they must make themselves indispensable in a good and positive sense. But this can only be achieved through words and a behavior of honesty, respectability, and dignity. In this sense, he must confront his fellow human beings with the correspondingly correct words and with his behavior, as well as with his actions, deeds, thoughts, and feelings, compassion, and in living out all virtues. He must never stray from these values, but if he does, he will suffer endless defeats, inner misery, hardship, suffering, and pain. Truly, it is the human being's duty to assert themselves in life in all conceivable situations, and if they are unable to do so, then it is their duty to seek help from correspondingly wise fellow human beings. Fundamentally, however, the human beings have to make their own decisions and put them into practice through their own willingness to make decisions, to develop their own creativity in all forms of their own abilities and possibilities, and also to bear full responsibility for this. It is the duty of every human being to cultivate and display an elementary expression of independence. Love, inner peace, and inner freedom and harmony, as well as compassion, humanity, honor, goodness, honesty, and dignity in every situation in life. And only by doing so, and only if all decisions in this regard are made by the human beings themselves, will they determine their own course in life. In this way, however, he also relieves his fellow human beings in many respects, because he exemplifies responsibility for them and shows them how to accept it, but also relieves them of many things. Many people are afraid of being someone who is supposed to have some kind of responsibility towards their fellow human beings, the flora and fauna and the planet, etc. And this is even the case with some people who have to act as superiors or otherwise lead human beings in leading positions, and who have to assign or control work. This fear is usually based on the fact that, on the one hand, decisions are to be made, and on the other hand, that mistakes could be made. The fact is, however, that when deciding on any matter, it is not necessarily important that everything is done right, because basically mistakes are always allowed, because without them nothing can prosper and nothing can become right. And furthermore, mistakes are there to learn from, to correct, and then to make everything better, so that in the end, with right words and right behavior, more good, correct, and error-free decisions are made than wrong ones. It is the same with every job, action or deed, etc., that has to be done, but it is more important whether the necessary information is received and understood correctly, and whether it is correct, ambitious, or misunderstood, and carried out without interest, which leads to mistakes. The power of correct words and correct behavior also refers in every respect to teaching and teaching in relation to the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, which is intended to help and guide the human beings of the earth to think and feel about the creational natural laws and recommendations, to perceive, understand, and obey them. In this respect, the words of the person giving the teaching must be chosen in a correct and appropriate manner, and his behavior must also be in accordance with the teaching. In this teaching, the spiritual teaching, respectively the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, does not contain anything in itself in such a way that it is intended to change the world, as the unneeded may misunderstand and thus attack, for example, the spiritual teaching and those who teach it. But these attacks are made only because the wisdom of the attackers to understand reality and its truth through understanding and reason is not yet correct and not formed, because they lack the decisive experience of life through which a clear-sightedness could be shrewdly achieved. And if such inexperienced human beings want to speak wisely and believe that they would choose the correct words for this purpose, as these have been used by clever believers since time immemorial, if you want to change the world, you have to start with yourself, then this way of speaking has a bitter taste. The bitterness is related to the incomprehension of the person who uses such dubious, old-fashioned words without understanding what is actually being said wrongly. Neither the spiritual teaching nor any other good and positive teaching about the human beings turning to, perceiving, accepting, and implementing in life the natural laws and recommendations of creation is aimed at changing the world. Any such teaching is only meant to work on the human being and to form him or herself into a true human being, whereby the should always stands for the fact that the human being has to decide for himself or herself whether he or she wants to do something or not. Therefore, any such teaching is solely aimed at the individual human beings who voluntarily make an effort to learn. And when he does so, he is living the whole of the teaching for his fellow human beings as well. And this is because only in this way is it possible to do justice to what is taught orally, in writing, through actions, deeds, and behavior, in correct words, in good, positive, and right things. In the spiritual teaching, that is to say, the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, as well as in every other good and positive teaching, The correct words are of importance, which should be aimed at addressing the human beings of the earth, so that they should strive to perceive the creational natural laws and recommendations, to orientate themselves towards them, to accept them, and to change and behave according to them. And explicitly, the should is in the foreground, because the whole of the pros and cons in every way lies in the absolutely own decision of each human beings. So there is nothing connected with manipulation, missionary work, violence, and coercion, because everything lies in the free decision of each individual. And contrary to the religions and sects and various organizations, etc., the spiritual teaching and any other good and positive teaching given in the same framework is not a fascinating instrument of salvation and power. Nor is it something that is supposedly advantageous with regard to material things or with regard to divine help and the best or at least good divine destiny. Every delusional belief in God in every imaginable form is bound to obligations and reciprocations in such a way that one has to pray respectively, beg for something divine, for divine help and divine blessing, etc. And if the begging is supposedly answered, then this again corresponds to a service in return, namely on the part of the divinity, which in turn requires a service in return on the part of the believers in praying or begging people, respectively, so that they have to answer the divine gift or God's help granted with much more thankful prayers. Ultimately, it is to be said that those who do not choose the correct words and do not form their behavior correctly will be disadvantaged by life and by their fellow human beings. When choosing the correct words and behavior, it is also important not to disregard your fellow human beings, not to rise above them, and not to treat them less than yourself. One's own true greatness must always be somewhat dampened outwardly by modesty. But if this is not done, arrogance, selfishness, and overestimation of self, etc., will result. It is therefore also necessary to cultivate true modesty in the use of correct words and behavior, which corresponds to great skill in dealing with one's fellow man. Modesty is also a dampening measure not to speak boastfully of oneself and not to let oneself shine in one's own light. For the more the human beings, through immodesty, make themselves and their actions, deeds, words, and behavior shine, the more they irritate those who listen to them. And this happens because the own shining, by which the own personality is to be lifted up, usually by boasting, etc., makes the fellow human beings fall the deeper into the darkness and makes them appear inferior and void. So it happens that the more luminous the human beings are, the darker they see themselves and their fellow human beings even consider themselves stupid and inferior, which often leads to psychic consciousness disorders. Therefore, if the human being, in true and honest modesty, is sage and wise in his relations with his fellow human beings, and knows the laws and recommendations of equality, equivalence, and equal rights, he knows that his own superiority over other human beings is in any case trivial, stupid, false, and harmful. Therefore, it is absolutely not necessary and therefore not required for the human beings who are truly and honestly humble to show superiority over others, as through boasting, lies, spreading rumors, and slander. Right is only to express oneself only with true, good, positive, and correct words, and equally with a similar behavior and with one's own opinions, knowledge and compassion, with true love and wisdom, and with valuable actions and deeds. Billy Simyase, Silver Star Center, the 2nd of June, 2012, 102 HRS.
After 24 minutes.
This article is very valuable, and I therefore understand Bernadette's wish, as well as your wish to have it included in our contact conversation today. The whole thing is really very good, so it is worth spreading it in different fonts.
Thanks. But from the article, a question for you also arises. Namely, how is it with regard to friendships and enmities with you, Playarin, as well as with regard to Gavalt and coercion? In the article I have written, that when friendships are sought after, that also enemies and thus adversaries will then appear.
Hostilities and enmities and ausartenda outcoming effects in the sense that gavolt and coercion arise, such as is the case with the Earth humans, do not appear, at least amongst our Plejaran people. If necessary, we answer gavolt and coercion with logical gavolt force, but never in the sense that life is endangered. And that is the case even if an attacking gavolt or coercion would be directed against us, because we combat such ausartenda gavolt activities in the extreme case without life-endangering arms, through which the antagonists are incapacitated only through fine spiritual perceptionlessness making, that is to say, through anesthetization. This, however, has no longer been necessary for thousands of years. However, this only applies for our own Plejaran peoples. Because it's different within our diverse federation, however, and in no case is it so bad, as it is among the Earth humans with their killing, murder, and destruction. Naturally, even with us Plejaran there is resentment, irritation, malice, and bitterness, and so forth, because from these no human being's nature is immune. However, with us, these unvirtues are kept within limits and get badly out of the control of the good human nature in no case. Without exception, such virtuelessness holds only a short time, a few days at most, after which intellect and rationality, honor, dignity, compassion, and mutual benevolence again prevail and return to normalcy. However, hostileness, enmities, and effects of the getting badly out of the control of the good human nature never come to prominence. This finds the reasoning herein because with us, already from early childhood, through an ample education, an ample virtuousness, as well as the logical mastery of thought, feeling-based, and emotional impulsations and working them out, is learned from personal discord. This speaks to the fact, therefore, that no enemies or any other similar forms also appear with the winning of friends, because this would contradict our ethics and logic.
So then no comparison to the Earthlings can be drawn, because with many, when it comes to perceiving their own advantages, there prevails neither true ethics nor logic or true compassion or love, etc. Enmity, jealousy, envy, greed, and egoism are very common and often degenerate into lifelong hatred, into legal battles, as well as not infrequently even into violence, coercion, murder, manslaughter, and destruction. That is unfortunately the reality and its truth as to how these Ausartungen occur with many human beings of the Earth throughout their entire life. Unfortunately, it will still take a very, very long time until this changes, if at all, because all this Ausarteta is habitually ingrained in the human beings of the Earth, to such an extent that there will be no large changes in the foreseeable future. Consequently, it is only the individual and small groups which bethink the better of it. And these are the ones which affect very much and must be an overarching example for the great masses, so that, extremely slowly, these align themselves to the examples. But as I said, that takes an immensely long time to complete, and if you Plejaran said that it will alone take around 800 years until larger groupings of the human beings of this world finally begin to turn with their thoughts and feelings to the reality, its truth, and thus also to the creational natural laws and recommendations, then up until then, there can and will still be very much terribleness coming to humankind, to the planet, its nature and the fauna and flora.
Which unfortunately will really be so.
Which is why we never cease with our mission, but rather must steadily move onwards, even if it brings success only in dribs and drabs, but constant dripping wears away the strongest stone.
This is indisputable, and indeed also in the sense of the mission.
Precisely. Then the following. Various people do not understand your statements regarding extraterrestrials which fly in the terrestrial airspace, or not. So I want to once again come to speak about unidentified flying objects, but not about those, which are from those extraterrestrial origins about which we have already spoken several times. And what you have determined is that all these were located as a result of historical records of the Nocademian peoples to Earth. For this purpose, you have also explained that eventually these planets' peoples to whom the spacecraft belonged have joined your Federation. There are diverse UFOs observed all over the world, of which different large and small objects belong to secret terrestrial developments in various countries. But this cannot be officially proven because their existence is denied and covered up, although detected by many witnesses. Hence, that's not all that is said, because there are still also the various large and small dimension change capable flying objects from the Earth's future. All of which you have spoken of openly or privately, as well as your daughter Simyase and Quetzal occasionally said something about this. But on that point, now to the question. For years, some spectacular UFO observations have been variously made worldwide, which were also confirmed by the military, Air Force, and other airplane pilots, police units, and private individuals. However, you had said that except for those which you mentioned, no more extraterrestrial flying devices were flown into the airspace of the Earth, or would fly in.
You mix something up or have misunderstood something. Dear friend, because what is correct is the fact of my views regarding this, that no further unknown Earth foreigners to us Pleiadian fly in the earthly space. In addition, I also spoke thereof, that we do not maintain any contacts with these unknown to us Earth foreigners which move in the earthly space, or that there is no possibility for us that we can get in contact with them. Regarding this, I spoke to this fact on several occasions. Thus, for example, in June 2006, note from Billy = 424th contact. The 17th of June 2006, as well as in December 2007. Note from Billy = 457th contact, the 12th of December 2007. And in December 2010, note from Billy = 511th contact, the 25th of December 2010. So if I have spoken about this, that no further Earth foreigners known to us come to the Earth, then this is referring exclusively to newly appearing Earth foreigners, not, however, to those whose existence here on Earth has already been known for quite some time.
Again, a misunderstanding, but now this would also be clarified. So those unknown to you are still present, whereby these also fly in and fly out. That really was totally misunderstood, both by various readers of the contact reports, as well as by me. But how does it stand with your investigations regarding contacts between Earth humans and these foreigners moving in the terrestrial airspace of whose existence you know?
As we have seen through extremely accurate investigations, no touches, that is to say, no contacts took place up until the present moment between these Earth foreigners unknown to us and any Earth humans.
It is simply maddening that misunderstandings creep in again and again because you do not speak in detailed enough plain language if you are not specifically asked for it.
This corresponds to a mutuality because you always answer only to direct questions without giving further details thereof. And so, as you keep to in this regard, we adhere to this as well. This form of questions and answers is indeed also correct in principle, because thereby one does not go adrift into hardly important details.
With which you are also naturally right again. For your explanation concerning your statements in old contact conversations, I shall pick out the corresponding information from the contact report blocks and attach them to your explanation. I can also utilize our current conversation for answering a bulletin question.
That might be good so those interested can read about it.
Let me ask you a question concerning water, respectively, water. How is it possible that in deep waters, such as seas and lakes, despite the enormous depths, the water does not become sick and life can exist in it? Simply because of the waves, that is not possible, is it? At least I can't imagine that, because the waves can't reach so deep down to the bottom.
You are not wrong. In fact, every body of water regenerates once a year, whereby the entire mass of water adjusts to a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius, and a complete circulation of the same to the bottom takes place. In this way, the waters remain healthy and viable.
Aha! I did not know that. Hence the question. Then something else. What about comets? They should also be perishable, right? If they get their tail from the sun's radiation, which can be up to 500 million and more kilometers long, then the comet's matter will wear out, which is why they cannot last forever and will have to dissolve one fine day. It also has to be considered how often such a comet comes into the sun area, whereby I think, for example, of Halley's Comet, which is already known to the Earthlings for about 2,000 years, has an orbit period of 76 years and, for example, will end its existence faster than the Hale-Bopp Comet, which was discovered only in 1995 and has a size of about 16x8 kilometers and a length of about 45 kilometers and an orbital period of 3,000 years, and which let the esotericism and doomsday fools go crazy when it appeared in 1997. This then claimed many suicide victims.
What you say is correct, of course. And as for the Halley's Comet you mentioned, our calculations suggest that its complete dissolution will take place in about 150,000 years. The Hale-Bopp Comet, on the other hand, will exist for millions of years.
For the Halley Comet, cosmically speaking, a very short time.
It is time for me again, dear friend, but I still have some private things to discuss with you, so we should redirect our conversation to that.
Of course, it is also good to meet, because I also have some private things I want to talk about. So start then you, dear friend.